Hey everyone, welcome back to the Nello Reads channel. Our first pro-revenge story of the day comes from Call Me Swellington. I was fired for inadvertently stumbling on my boss's malfeasance. I used his obsession with golf and watches to get him fired. This was in the last throes of the analog mid-90s. Fax machines, FedEx, dial-up computing, and voicemail were the most common business tools. I was a young regional sales manager for a major branded consumer product. I covered the grocery class of trade in 11 western states. My division worked out of Chicago, and I had a home office on the West Coast. I had made my reputation by typically making my quota and keeping costs within budget. I would get reassigned to struggling markets, and more often than not, I would usually make my sales number. Nothing too fancy, I just figured where the best opportunities were and concentrated on them. In those days, we had something called Market Development Funds, MDF, or as we called it, Making Days Fun. In the time before such things were deemed illegal, it was money we could literally use for almost anything you could imagine. Wining and dining, sending buyers to the Super Bowl, taking them on market research trips. I once took 6 honchos for a weekend of fishing in Mexico. As long as you had the receipts and your boss knew, except in cases where they specifically asked not to know, we were free to spend money as we saw fit. This was old school Mad Men style slush funds, all tax deductible. Typically, the MDF money was 2% of your total annual gross sales, and was use it or lose it, meaning it had to be spent because it wouldn't roll over. I always had some left over. As a team player, I would let my boss, Sasquatch, know, so he could use it. No big deal. Towards the end of the year, my weekly FedEx pack from the company started including sign-offs for payments to a supplier I had never heard of before. What was weird is they were for a demo company that wasn't one of my regional suppliers. If you have ever been offered a sample or a coupon in a grocery store, that was a demo company. I called the broker/agent in that market and learned that they had never used the company, or even heard of them. I finally figured out that they were from Sasquatch, and that he had thrown them in with my other sign-offs. I called him and asked if he knew what they were. He said that they should be assigned to my MDF, and not to worry about them. This was a little unusual, because demos would normally be taken out of other money, or came down from marketing. Whatever, I signed off on them. Hung out to dry. About 3 months later, I was called into headquarters for a meeting where I was told I was being transferred to a market that I had never worked before, and would be required to relocate. At the time, my wife was pregnant, and we just started an extensive remodel on our newly purchased house. The company had some relocation benefits, but it was just too hectic to pull up roots and move to the southeast. I declined the offer and was told that I could look for another job within the company or receive a severance package. I wound up taking the severance. The truth comes to light. Several months later, one of my ex-coworkers told me that my region had been taken over by one of Sasquatch's past work associates, who he managed to get hired in my spot, and that the region was tanking badly. Nothing made sense. Why was I terminated and then replaced by someone who lived in another city and who couldn't do the job? I started to think in my naivety that I may have put a target on my back. After some research and digging, which was much harder before the internet, I learned that the demo company billing the MDF was based in my ex-boss's previous city, and was just a PO box, a telephone, and a DBA registered by the new person in my job. I later found out that this was Sasquatch's girlfriend/mistress. I was livid. Like most people, I tend to plan revenge in my head, but never actually really go through with it. Most of the time, it's a coping mechanism, and not very useful in moving on past being wronged. But this was so egregious, so uncalled for, and so disruptive to my life that I felt I had to get even. My plan evolved to take this guy down. Whatever the time it took, whatever the cost in lives or money, I was going to get this mofo. I may have been able to rat him out to the company, but they might have dismissed my complaint as coming from a disgruntled ex-employee with an axe to grind. The hook. I decided that I was going to approach the guy as a phony recruiter, not just a guy collecting resumes, but as a retained corporate headhunter, someone paid to onboard people for big jobs. I had spent a year early in my career working for a super exclusive headhunting firm and knew exactly what transpired in the process. My subterfuge required international telexes, phony letterhead, faked English accents, and overseas friends to do my bidding. Sasquatch was obsessed with expensive watches and golf. He played regularly and watched pro golf both on TV and live. He would incessantly chatter on about both subjects. To bait him, I arranged for him to be approached for an executive position with a major Swiss watch company. The position would also be tied to pro golf and other swanky sports, sponsorships, and included a shopping list of benefits and perks. The job would require hobnobbing with major sports organizers, flying around the world, first class, and basically spending money. It was a job he could only dream of. The setup. In the slow and methodical long con, I strung him along until the time was right to close with an offer. The only catch was that he had to report for Switzerland for final offer and onboarding. I deliberately scheduled it for the week of the old jobs division meetings and reporting. They were mandatory and impossible to miss without raising red flags. Sasquatch was worried that his absence would be impossible to cover, especially if he was out of the country. The headhunting firm said they could move the appointment up a few days so that he would be able to attend his meeting, but that he would need to purchase an unrestricted business class seat and make his own hotel reservations. Save your receipts, and the watch company will reimburse you, he was told. Sasquatch showed up to his swanky hotel suite, using his own credit card for the expensive room, and promptly received a note from the watch company that his appointment had to be rescheduled for the following Monday because of a major corporate crisis. Sasquatch called the phony recruiter in a panic about missing the corporate meetings back in the States. It was agreed that he would call in sick, and that whatever happened with the old job, he was heading to much greener fairways. Enjoy your weekend in Europe. By Monday, you'll be in your dream job. The sting. While Sasquatch was cooling his jets in Europe, I nonchalantly called his boss, the president of the division, and casually asked for a reference on Sasquatch's work ethic and dates of employment. You'd be surprised how often this mistake happens. The president, to his credit, didn't tip his hand or act very surprised by the call, but like a good corporate wonk, he referred me to human resources. I let it slip he was in Europe finalizing his new job and that he'd already given the company notice. My bad. Bloody aftermath and how the Revenge overstepped its original mission. Eventually, I was able to put together the aftermath from old coworkers and other people in the trade who did not know I was a revenge ninja. When Monday came and went, Sasquatch must have been apoplectic. This is to be assumed since we had cut all communications to let him twist in the wind. We received at least 20 calls to the exchange and multiple faxes. Sasquatch hung around the hotel for a day or two, and then finally decided to leave for home. I assumed at some point he may have contacted the watch company, but I never confirmed it. When he finally got home, he found his office had been packed up and left with his wife. An HR person met him off-site to give him his severance and retrieve the car and other company property. I heard his wife left him sometime later, and his mistress was fired for theft. I figure he spent at least $10K on travel and hotel. So, not gonna lie, that's some really evil revenge. But Sasquatch fired OP just to get his mistress a job. That's pretty bad too. But even so, I hope I never wrong OP in any way, because that's some pretty far revenge just for losing a job. Our next story comes from Awk Lemon. Don't mess with an engineer. I worked for a company that provides specialized equipment used in manufacturing. To protect my anonymity, I'll have to be vague about what exactly this machine does. During my time working in this field, I got to know many clients who would need these machines installed and serviced. One of these customers we'll call Jake. I later left the company for a different job, but Jake apparently kept my number. One afternoon, I got a call from Jake that they wanted a new unit installed and another unit needed maintenance and wanted to know if I was available. I let him know that I left the company, but that I could pass him on to someone who could help. He tells me he'll pay 2 times my current rate to install the unit over the weekend. He lets me know that the company has increased the rates for installation and the company just can't afford it. The instructions they sent over just aren't clear enough and their engineers are scratching their heads trying to figure it out. He begs me to consider and I agree. For more context, installing this unit can take a good few hours, or up to a day on your own. The company gives you 2 options. You can either pay for an engineer to come and install it, or you can save money and they will send instructions so the customer's own engineers can install it. The instructions aren't easy to follow, and it's company policy that if someone has started to install the equipment, the supplier wouldn't get involved since they couldn't verify that any of the pieces weren't broken. This will be important later. I drive down on the weekend and they show me boxes of equipment. I set to work and I make good progress installing the unit. Around 6 hours in and I'm stopped by Jake, who greets me. I let him know I'm nearly finished and he tells me, "Sorry, but they just don't have the budget to pay you." He understands my frustration, but his engineers can't take it from here. To say I was frustrated was an understatement. I wanted revenge. There's a small button inside the unit that changes the unit into test mode. This is done to perform maintenance on the unit, but it's impossible to configure the unit with this button pressed. It's only possible to reach this button using a pin, so it's not easily pressed during installation. Because of this, the installation instructions don't mention it. There's no real way of telling the equipment is in test mode. It just won't work normally. I think you can guess where this is going. I click the button, collect my things, and leave. Monday morning, I get a call from Jake. I declined. I knew my old company wouldn't get involved since I already started installing the unit. I knew his engineers would never figure it out. I just had to let him stew. A few days later, with many missed calls, I finally pick up. Jake is furious. He asks me where the hell I've been and why I haven't been picking up the phone. He tells me they can't figure out how to configure the machine and they need my help. I tell him, "Why is this my problem? You won't pay me." He told me he was sorry and they would work something out if I could get there as soon as possible. I told him, "Oh no, you're going to pay me £7,000 up front before I do anything." I'd never felt this powerful before. He screamed at me for a bit and hung up. He called back a day later after saying he's sorry for how he acted and said that I could come fix it and he would pay me, in a totally defeated tone. He tried to fight it, saying he'll pay me when I was done, but I was having none of it. After a bit of back and forth, he agrees to pay me up front. The money hit my account and I came in the next day. The look of confusion over his face when I took out a pin and changed the unit from test mode was priceless. It was even more priceless seeing his reaction to me packing up my tools and leaving after only 20 minutes of configuring. Easiest £7,000 I'd ever made. Don't try to mess with a professional problem solver. People like Jake are just so scummy. Like, who promises to pay someone, has them do the work, and then says, "Oh, never mind, can't pay you"? I feel like that's just so wrong on so many levels, and I hope nobody watching this ever encounters that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's stories, and I'll see you in the next video.